The flames are backing down, but the work is only beginning. Smoke sits low over a city that tried to hide its treasures in cellars and its people behind doors that did not hold. Soldiers move like shadowed arithmetic, stepping over carpets ground into the dust, past the splinters of idols, toward their real task, counting. An empire proves itself not with mercy or rage, but with lists. Gold, silver, silk, spices, horses, artisans, and the category no manifest prince, but every veteran knows, people. Age first, skill second, status third. The order is not improvised. It is a habit, a set of grooves worn deep by repetition from the Yellow River to the Oxus. Here is the hook you cannot look away from. Conquest turns intimacy into an instrument. The victors do not pretend otherwise. Highborn women are set aside first, not only for beauty but for the grammar of blood. To claim a lineage is to overwrite it. The line between household and state, between a bed and a border, has already been erased by the time the scribes begin to write. Permission is the only principle that matters now. An act that would be called a crime yesterday becomes policy today when a superior nods. Violence does not stop. It is organized. That is the difference between a mob and an empire. To understand how this machine works, you start not in a palace but on the steppe before the world knew the name Genghis. A young Temujin's wife, Burta, is carried away by enemies. He rides with teeth clenched around old hatreds, breaks the merchant camp, and brings her back. Months have passed. She is pregnant. The son Yochi will always attract a whisper, the small, perpetual hiss of doubt that never leaves a council chamber. Temujin insists. He raises the child as his own. Yet the rumor coils beneath succession debates, beneath his caution with women's bodies, beneath every ledger line that treats reproduction as strategy. Imagine leading an empire and never quite silencing that question. Whose blood is this? On the steppe, marriage is policy in a dozen directions at once. Alliance, economy, ritual, and yes, desire. Polygyny is normal for men of rank. The leveret, widows married inside the clan, keeps children and property under one roof. Wives are not cloistered. They run ordos, roving administrations with herds, servants, guards, ledgers. A senior wife can dispense justice in her domain and move troops with words. Power rides on rails laid by violence. Women can be agents and they can be spoils. The system allows both truths at once. Once Temujin becomes Genghis Khan, those norms scale like cavalry columns. He marries for love and for leverage. Bert anchors the Winter Ordo and bears 4 sons whose lines will redraw maps. He also marries across powerful clans, Kuyulin the Merkit, Yesugen and Yesui the Tatar, to bind former enemies into his order. Each wife receives people, pasture, responsibilities. Each becomes a node in a web that holds the empire together when the great camp disperses. Parallel to these ranked marriages runs a colder system, seizure and redistribution of women from conquered populations. In Bukhara, in Samarkand, in Zhengdu, chroniclers record the same choreography: presentation, evaluation, assignment. The highest born for the Khan, others to princes, generals, then ordinary soldiers. Not chaos, policy. Later writers attribute to the Khan a body of discipline, the yasa, that punishes unlicensed predation within the ranks. The key word is unlicensed. A soldier who took what had not been allotted could be flogged, demoted, even executed. The prohibition guarded allocation, not autonomy. The logic is stark. A yes from above turns theft into tribute, enslavement into a gift, assault into state business. Discipline is not virtue. It is geometry. Lines are drawn. Men die for stepping over them. Inside those lines, the intimate is legible to scribes and enforceable by guards. If the practice feels medievally ubiquitous, 2 differences matter here: scale and integration. The Mongol machine moved fast, reproduced its methods across continents, and integrated sexual economy with logistics. Artisans were spared and translocated to build new cities. Scribes reassembled markets. Noble women became signals that an old order was canceled and a new one installed. The same lists that shipped weavers east also allotted households to commanders as rewards. A commander might receive herds, tents, servants, and people. Each allotment said the same thing: your tomorrow belongs to the empire. What did it feel like inside that system? Most voices have not reached us. We glimpse edges: a queen who becomes a power broker, a princess paraded and placed, a captive assigned to a soldier who rides again at dawn and never asks her name. The machine is terrifying not because it howls, but because it hums. It prefers order to spectacle, paperwork to plunder, permission to passion. The hook, again. Once intimacy is made legible to the state will file it, stamp it, and move it by the cartload. The aftermath of any taken city looks similar because repetition is the point. Tents rise in straight lines. The seat of power is placed where the defeated ruler once sat, because theater is part of policy. A consort from the fallen house is claimed not for companionship, but for proclamation. To hold a dynasty's women is to hold its future tents. That act is copied under 1,000 banners until even enemies can read it like a road sign. The message is concise. There is no room that is not political, no private space that policy cannot enter. In the silence after the drums, the counting resumes and the lists march on. Before we proceed, the terms must be clear and the story must be told without euphemism. Sexual coercion is part of this history. We will not be graphic. We will be precise. The structure we are tracing is administrative terror. It turns people into nouns that fit on lists and turns desire into a function of rule. Keep that definition in your ear as we ride from burnt courtyards into the tents where the empire keeps its heartbeat. The hook does not let go. Once a government learns to count intimacy, it will use the total. Start with the personal, because policy starts there too. Bert's abduction and return do more than scar a family. They seed a rumor that grows political roots. Joki's paternity remains the whisper you can hear behind every argument about succession. The founder says one thing. The factions say another. That tension teaches a lesson the Khan never forgets. Reproduction must be patrolled as tightly as borders. If uncertainty can unmake a dynasty, then certainty must be manufactured and enforced. The ordo is where that enforcement becomes daily life. Imagine a city made of tents, each a ministry with its own payroll and patrols. A senior wife's camp is winter government. Herds counted, fodder moved, guards rotated, disputes tried. She receives envoys, grants petitions, posts stewards, and, crucially, keeps lists of people. When the Khan rides out, he leaves behind administrations that do not wobble, staffed by women who convert favor into stability. Agency is real here and recorded in sources that disliked admitting it. The paradox is the point. Elite women could exercise documented power atop a foundation built with other women's dispossession. Marriage is the hinge of these households. A chief wife's sons inherit not only blood but credibility. Secondary wives' sons inherit names and property, but a lighter gravity. Daughters are treaties in human form. To marry a daughter into a subordinate house is to plant a flag inside it. The husband becomes a gurigan, a son-in-law of the imperial line, and finds honor tied to obligation. He must supply troops, appear at court on schedule, accept being watched. A slap dealt in his home can become a diplomatic incident. The bed is now a road with tolls. The levirate extends this logic. Widows remain within the clan, folded back into kinship to keep property and influence from leaking out. To a religious jurist from settled lands, the practice is scandalous. To a step-elder, it is prudence. Continuity disguised as marriage. Secondary wives and their children follow the herds of lineage, not whim. The machinery blurs conjugal, filial, political, and economic categories until the words stop meaning separate things. In a world that moves, the system's virtue is that it keeps moving parts attached. All this runs in parallel with conquest's colder procedures, presentation, evaluation, assignment, chronicles. Preserve the ceremony because elites understood ceremony best. Names are recorded where names matter to diplomacy. Elsewhere, language abstracts until a person becomes a phrase. Some maidens of great beauty, many daughters of princes. A commander who obeys well might be allotted households. A brave soldier, a girl of such and such a family. The syntax is the giveaway, given, assigned, bestowed. Bureaucracy wraps brutality in verbs of generosity. Inside the ranks, discipline sharpens what the law will tolerate. Do not touch a wife's cart without leave. Do not brush the curtain of a prince's tent. Do not requisition what the allocator has not allotted. The penalties are severe because the line between private plunder and public policy must be bright. The rule protects the monopoly on distribution, not the distributed. Yet for those inside the circle, the effect can feel like order, awful but predictable. A city spared from a sack recognizes the same list-making machinery and may mistake it for mercy because it is not a mob. Consider the two engines together. Marriage as alliance and allotment as reward. In peacetime, the mechanism wears silk. The daughter moves with musicians, gifts, letters, and gold thread. In Conquest, the velvet is gone and the timing is cruel. The presentation follows the surrender of keys and the weighing of treasure. Both events move people as policy. Both events are legible to governors and grooms alike. Both are counted. This is not a story of spectacle, but of saturation. Logistics fuse with intimacy. The postal roads that carry orders also carry brides and captives. Census and tribute figures absorb households as if they were coin. The steppes grammar migrates into conquered chanceries, and scribes trained in Persian or Chinese invent phrases that make the practices sound like civilization. Joined in alliance, taken into the household, bestowed by favor. Beneath the polished words, a creaking cart and a person learning rules that will govern her tomorrow. Return one last time to the rumor and its lesson. If uncertainty about a child could unbalance a throne, then certainty would be engineered going forward. That is why touching the women's carts without leave is a capital offense. That is why a chief wife's ordo keeps the best ledgers. That is why a daughter's marriage is timed to a campaign's needs. Reproduction is policy, and policy is nothing more than a will enforced by lists. The hook stays sharp. In this world, the softest thing, who shares a bed with whom, is hardened into statecraft. The Khwarezmian War turns river valleys into classrooms where the empire teaches its method, city by city. Bukhara opens its gates after siege, gambling on mercy. The gamble fails. Mercy is not the point. Chroniclers place words in the conqueror's mouth in the Grand Mosque, but the sermon matters less than the procedure that follows outside the walls. Tents sprout like measured mushrooms. Artisans one way, fighting men another, scholars to be sorted, merchants to reveal hiding places. Then the ritual everyone will learn to flinch at, the presentation. Nobles first. Mothers with bracelets stacked high. Daughters with wedding dye fading. Titles become tickets. Lineage becomes price. Samarkand tries a different trick. Many defenders throw open gates and call themselves friends. The city sighs more than screams. The lists resume anyway. The highest born are set aside for the Khan's household. Others move down the ladder, a distribution that doubles as a message to every court within reach. Your genealogies can be rewritten in a week. Urgench fights hardest, its canals turning streets into traps. When it falls, anger amplifies the familiar choreography, but does not change it. Officers keep lists. Households are assigned as if they were flocks. The same verbs, received, bestowed, allotted, cover 1,000 small tragedies with a blanket of administration. Inside this campaign trails a formidable counterplayer, Turkan Khatun, queen mother and architect of marriages who once braced her son's realm with daughters placed like stones. She tries the old arts, bargains, alliances, insinuations, but the river of horses does not notice a wall made of weddings. Chroniclers disagree on her end. They agree on what her capture symbolized. Even a woman who moved kings by arranging beds could not outmaneuver an empire that treated beds as roads. The lesson is not that marriage fails as policy, but that against a machine that integrates marriage with logistics, any single household's strategy will be absorbed. From a distance, it might look like restraint. No drunken sack, no unlicensed frenzy. From inside, the effect is the same as chaos, only colder. A knock instead of a riot. A roll call instead of a chase. The intimate life of a city translated into numbers. Households moved, bodies reassigned, wombs redirected. The speed is new. The repetition is the brand. What was episodic elsewhere becomes systematic here. And because it is systematic, it scales. The arteries of trade become the empire's veins. Artisans are marched east to seed industries. Silk workers teach new towns to spin wealth. Scribes align tax rolls to new masters. Along these roads travel the human pledges that make governors obedient. Brides for princes, hostages dressed as honor, sons-in-law whose titles are leashes. The empire's promise to allies is precise. Proximity to the imperial line brings prestige and safety, so long as you interpret safety to mean dependence. The presentation, again and again, is where a city sees its private life become public business. It is not an accident that the ritual follows tribute counting. Coin and kin are made commensurate. To stand where a dethroned ruler stood, to take a consort from his house, to sit on his seat and eat from his plate, is to enact a proclamation the whole region understands without translation. Ceremony is conquest grammar. The script repeats until the conquered can recite it in their sleep. One detail exposes the logic more than any speech. The prohibition against touching what belongs to the Khan or his princes. Do not approach the women's carts. Do not cross the curtain. The taboo is enforced with exemplary punishment because it protects the allocator's prerogative. It broadcasts to allies and enemies alike that there is nothing outside policy's reach and nothing within it that escapes its rules. Mercy appears only as calibrated clemency, a favor that binds rather than frees. Pause on the language again, the way lists turn people into nouns. Some maidens of great beauty. Many daughters of princes. The chronicler is not lazy. He is exact. Abstraction is a tool for smoothing horror into policy. The empire does not require a name to move a person. It requires a category. That is how the machine avoids clogging on compassion. It runs on categories and keeps running. In the end, these cities do not simply fall. They are refiled. Their most precious continuity, families that bridge generations, are unthreaded and woven into another's design. A week after the taking, the libraries are lighter, the workshops quieter, the market stalls speaking new prices in the same alleys. And in a side courtyard, a small line waited beside carts under guard. This, more than any speech, is the imprint left behind. A city's tomorrow tabulated, its intimate life counted, its future married to someone else's plan. Zhengdu, a capital that turned war into ceremony, masters a ritual older than its walls. Heiken, peace by marriage. A princess leaves behind ceilings and enters a world of sky and felt, her title half erased by the journey. The message of her procession is clear to both courts. From the Jin, we acknowledge your power. From the Khan, I accept your acknowledgement and your blood. Tribute, gold, silk, horses, hawks, is promised in numbers large enough to make breathing easier in a besieged city. Then the court tries to turn a treaty into a trick. It flees south to a new capital the moment the riders pull back. The answer comes on hooves. In 1215, the outer wards go like paper. The inner city holds and then breaks. Fire leaps roof to roof as if remembering it once belonged to the wind. And inside the palace's scorched geometry, the post-siege choreography plays out with a composure that stings. Officers pitch tents in straight lines. Scribes lay out brushes. Runners collect the names of nobles who did not manage to run. The presentation occurs as if walls still stood. Titles are announced with professional calm. Consort, lady-in-waiting, daughter of a minister. Because in this system, names have value only when recognized by the ledger. The highest are set aside for the Khan's household. Others are assigned down the grades. The verbs are the same as on the Western campaign: received, bestowed, allotted. The reality is a harvest. Imagine a conqueror drunk on spoils and you will miss the point. The point is theater as proclamation. Sit where the last emperor sat. Eat from a golden platter because that is what the last man did. Claim a consort from the defeated house because everyone can read what that means. The act becomes a language the region cannot ignore. Your dynasty's womb answers to my standard. Inside the ranks, prohibitions sharpen. Do not touch the women's carts. Do not brush the curtain. Do not pretend confusion. Men die for these violations because the monopoly on allocation is sacred. Discipline is geometry. It draws lines that move with the camp and expects memory to move with them. The effect for those inside is brutal order. For those outside, a message. Even intimacy has a chain of command. Heiken is not a uniquely Jin tactic, and it is not uniquely Mongol to accept it. The Uyghur Idikut reads the weather and offers a daughter. Favored status follows. Western Shah marries in and later tries to wriggle free. It loses capital and dynasty with the attempt. Across Central and East Asia, fathers who once measured power by wall thickness learn to measure it by proximity to a marriage. To accept a princess is to hold a key to a rival house. To give one is to accept a leash and call it a garland. Walk the city a week later. The palace library is lighter. The lacquer remains, but the bearers are gone. Artisans queue with chisels and belts. Their skills will travel east. In another yard, women wait beside carts packed with rolled mats and chests. What is left when someone else writes your inventory? Not silence, procedure. The machine has no need to roar if the lists are accurate. A legend hums at the margins. A captured princess feigns compliance, strikes the conqueror, and poisons a dynasty's future. The story persists because it gives a woman the last word in a narrative that usually denies her any. The likely truth is duller, death by illness or campaign injury. Believe the emotion, not the detail. Myths sprout where records cannot bear to sit, and their roots tell you what people wanted to be true. In the archives, the repeatable unit remains. A marriage that leashes, a redistribution that rewards, a prohibition that protects the allocator's will. Zhongdu's lesson is not that treaties by bed are always broken. It is that they are never private. They are public instruments measured and audited like coin. A princess does not buy time. She buys surveillance. The clock she winds is the one that measures obedience. When the alarm rings, riders arrive. The felt-wrapped cart moves at night. Somewhere under a sky without windows lies a burial no one will locate later. Morning finds the camp arranged without its heartbeat and discovers the rhythm continues anyway. Banners in a ring. Words like frost in the air. Behind the ring, women who know exactly how much government lives in a household. The will names Ogedei Great Khan. The steppes grammar takes over. The youngest son, Tolui, holds the hearth and, for a time, the regency. The transition is not accidental. It is domestic politics turned imperial procedure. Ogedei rules, conquers, drinks too much, appoints ministers who skim and some who save, and dies in 1241 while the Western army is still inside Europe's imagination. The empire pauses. A widow steps forward with the poise of someone who has been writing memos to the future. Toragina Khatun takes the reins not as courtesy, but as fact. She clears her husband's favorites, installs her own, elevates a Muslim administrator in the West who knows how to turn promises into tax. She calls a Kurultai on her schedule, not anyone else's, because timing is a weapon too. Her project is simple and lethal. Secure the throne for her son Guyuk. How does she do it? With the same materials her husband used, lists, marriages, assignments. Posts are allotted as a Khan would allot horses. Rivals who take without permission are punished as thieves of authority, not of goods. Marriage ropes are pulled tight, a daughter promised here to sweeten a cousin's loyalty. A concubine redistributed under the leveret there to neutralize a clan. Complaints that she is a woman land like feathers in a forge. She controls what counts, the ordos, the guards, the seals, the people who open your tent flap or do not. In 1246, on a plain crowded with felt palaces, she produces the outcome she intended. Guyuk rises in another theater. Surgagtani Beki, Tolui's widow, mother to Monka, Kublai, Hulagu, Arik Boka, declines the leverate and builds a polity around her sons without being folded back into another man's tent. She learns the tax systems of the lands she touches. She cultivates Nestorian bishops, Muslim jurists, Chinese scholars. She does not command armies, yet armies move when she speaks because governors prefer instructions that keep provinces solvent. She marries children with attention to future maps. She keeps faith with brothers-in-law while keeping a ledger in her head of debts and routes to collect them. Her engineering is patient. When Guyuk dies and the empire lurches again, her coalition lifts Munka to the throne. The quiet victory is architectural, not theatrical. Elsewhere, the machinery hums. Batu in the northwest binds princes with oaths and kinship. Brides and hostages cross rivers with caravans. A tribute becomes habit. In Persia, the Ilkhanate is born under Hulagu, and beside him stands a Christian queen of Karaita blood, whose title opens church doors from Tabriz to Maraga. She did not arrive by volunteering. She arrived because political math required a hinge in that spot. In the central heartlands, the leverate continues to operate like a wheel. Secondary wives reassigned when a prince dies, children held under the same lineage's protection, property kept from leaking away. To an outsider, cruelty. To insiders, continuity. The categories overlap until they are the same. Regency exposes the system's core. Households are governments. Who sleeps where matters. Who pours the drink matters. Who sits near the curtain matters. Men make speeches in circles. Women edit outcomes in tents. If you still imagine politics as a clatter of spears, you will miss the decade's most decisive acts because they are lists, timing, and placement. The hook tightens. The empire's most formidable engineers of stability are sometimes women. The chronicles tried to keep in the margins but couldn't, because the paperwork said otherwise. Sources disagree on the contours of the yasa, but they agree on the empire's appetite for discipline. The rule most often quoted in domestic spaces is blunt. Do not touch what belongs to the Khan or his princes. Women's carts are off limits. Curtains are not to be brushed. Allocation is sacred. Within that boundary, the system treats intimacy as a public utility. The law's purpose is not to protect the vulnerable. It is to protect the allocator's monopoly. Punishment is exemplary. A soldier who takes unallotted captives risks execution. A commander who skims from distributions risks demotion and disgrace. A governor who allows private pillage risks the same. The effect is to turn the worst acts into state business. Theft of people becomes tribute when stamped. Enslavement becomes a gift when recorded. Assault becomes administration when permitted. This is why the machine looks merciful to some contemporaries. It dampens chaos. It is not mercy. It is order. Inside this frame, you can see why the empire's reproductive strategy is meticulous. Berta's story has institutional consequences. A chief wife's sons must carry a credibility that will resist rumor. Secondary lines must be recognized without confusing gravity. Daughters must be placed where they create gurigans who can be watched. Widowhood is not a private state. It is a political logistics problem to be solved by the leveret. Consent, in this grammar, means permission from above. The state's appetite for measurable outcomes reaches the body like a postal road reaches a remote valley. Census figures include households acquired. Tribute schedules include brides sent and received. The couriers who carry edicts also carry people who symbolize those edicts. A governor who averts a sack by timely surrender will still host a presentation because the ritual is not about rage. It is about reclassification. The private is refiled as public. The law's geometry is legible beyond the step. Scribes in Persian and Chinese chancelleries translated into their own idioms, joined in alliance, bestowed by favor, taken into the household. The gloss is not hypocrisy. It is bureaucracy. The machine needs words that read like civilization. The reality does not change. The verbs give away the structure: given, allotted, presented. You could replace coin with people in the sentence, and the grammar would still hold. Why dwell on this? Because the terror here is not spectacular cruelty, but comprehensive integration. The sexual economy of conquest is not a byproduct. It is part of logistics, reward, and rule. A general is paid with tents, herds, and households. A prince is leashed with a daughter and a title that binds pride to obedience. A city is pacified with allotments that turn would-be plunderers into accountants. The system's genius, if you can stomach the word, is that it makes coercion predictable. Predictability is how empires last. Not every truth lives in text. Some are whispered, some echo in genes. A particular Y chromosome cluster spreads across Central Asia like a watermark from the 13th century. Scholars debate whether it belongs to the founder himself or to a close male relative. They agree on the mechanism. Concentrated power multiplies descendants. This star in the data is not proof of lurid myths. It is proof of systemic advantage. A family that controls marriages, forbids touching what it claims, and enforces those rules with riders will leave tracks the future can measure. Myths grow where archives avert their eyes. A princess who strikes back in a tent. A wound that rots an empire maker. Believe what the story wants, that audiences longed for a woman to have the last word. The likely facts are simpler, but the myth's persistence teaches the same lesson as the records. Intimacy is never private in this system. It always speaks policy. Names surface like islands in fog. Berta, winter anchor. Kolan praised even by hostile pens. Yesugan and Yesui, Tatar sisters taken on campaign and trusted thereafter. Ibaka Beki, a Kongli princess whose reassignment later reads like a marginal note that says everything about marriage as a retiable knot. Chabi, Kublai's chief wife, urging moderation in tribute and defending subjects from sale, her advice pressing policy where it counts. Dokes Khatun, Christian queen beside Hulagu, interceding for churches even as her household grows with captives from cities that said their prayers anyway. Each name sits on a mound of unnamed women whose lives were folded into the same machine. Daily life behind curtains is not colorful anecdote. It is governance. Lessons in speech and posture. The ritual of pouring drink with the right hand. Bowing toward the standard of 9 white tails at dawn. Short journeys to rivers under guard. Long migrations as the camp wheels to new pasture. Nights when you are summoned. Nights when you are forgotten. A pregnancy that changes rank. A birth that changes more than yours. A steward who can soften or harden a day. Older women whose science is survival, teaching when to speak and when to swallow words. This routine is policy embodied. Rumor, record, and data converge on one conclusion. The system did not merely tolerate coerced intimacy, it administered it. That is why its marks survive where they do. The evidence spans genres, chronicles, lists, legends, lineages, and they all point to the same grammar. A marriage that leashes, a redistribution that rewards, a prohibition that protects the allocator. The hook holds because it keeps explaining new facts without strain. By the time Munka takes the throne with Sorghaghtani's quiet engineering, the empire is a web of marriages that hold like chains and a warren of households where the intimate and the imperial are the same room. Campaigns to Syria with Hulagu, to Dali with Kublai, to Riverlands with Batu's heirs carry the grammar forward. In each new conquest, officers make lists, palaces stage presentations, and alliances are sealed with daughters who turn men into gurigans. The repeatable unit remains constant across landscapes and faiths because the machine is not cultural ornament. It is administrative core, yet margins exist and people work them. A bride learns the ledgers better than the men who think they own them and trades favors into safety for her staff. A widow refuses the levirate and convinces power to leave her orbit intact by making herself indispensable to revenue. A princess centers tribute and becomes a patron of scholars, turning patronage into a second language of rule. A captive of high birth leverages education and languages into a space that is more than survival. These are not happy endings, but they are real resistances, and they matter because they demonstrate that even in a system designed to file people, some refuse to fit the drawer. What does the machine want? Obedience, predictability, continuity. What does it fear? Ambiguity and succession, alliances that do not translate into supply, households it cannot audit. That is why Berta's rumor mattered. That is why women's carts are guarded. That is why a daughter's marriage is never only a wedding. If you are looking for the essence of Mongol rule in this period, it is not in the speed of horses alone. It is in the way lists reach into rooms and how rooms answer back by turning themselves into offices. The paradox at the end is the same as at the beginning. The system that drowned the nameless in coerced intimacy manufactured at its apex some of the most formidable political actors of the age who happened to be women. They governed with the grammar on offer. Marriages, appointments, ledgers, timing. Their agency was built atop extraction. The two truths coexisted without canceling each other. Return to the smoky courtyard where we began. The line moves. The dais waits. A woman steps forward. Titles whisper behind her. Eyes measure value with terrifying calm. She enters an ordo that smells of milk and leather and sun-baked felt. A scribe records the names that will shape the rest of her life. Older women teach rules that will keep her breathing. Somewhere, a general receives his allotment and believes he has been paid. Somewhere else, a governor reads a letter written by a chief wife and adjusts a tax to keep a province from breaking. The machine works because enough people prefer order to chaos, even when the order consumes them. The story does not end with conquest or even with succession. It ends in the long shadow cast by procedures that outlived banners. The empire fractured into conaties. Yet the grammar of intimacy as policy remained visible in the way heirs fought, ruled, and remembered. What Genghis Khan organized with discipline and lists became habits his descendants could not shake, even when they hated each other. Households continued to be governments. In the UN, Chabi's counsel to Kublai shaped policies that millions felt, from tribute demands to the sale of captives. Her interventions softened sharp edges, but confirmed the rule. A chief wife's voice counted because the machinery made her a note of authority. In the Ilkhanate, Dok's Khatun's intercessions for Christians were preserved not as anomalies but as part of governance, her household a court within a court. In the Golden Horde, marriages kept princes tethered across rivers and forests. The repetition is proof. The machine replicated. When the central line weakened, what survived was the ledger. Successions were contested, but always with reference to households, marriages, and ordos. A widow's camp could tilt a decision. A daughter's placement could steady or destabilize a province. The policies of intimacy remained the operating system, even when the empire's political hardware splintered. This continuity also explains the paradox that the empire's collapse did not erase its presence. In regions as far apart as Russia, Persia, and China, genealogies absorbed Mongol branches through marriage. Dynasties grafted themselves onto the imperial line, calling themselves Guregan even generations later. Blood was a political language, and the empire had made it fluent. Centuries after the banners fell, rulers claimed legitimacy through marriages contracted under Mongol logic. The machine became invisible because it had been naturalized. The genetic star cluster that scholars trace is not only data about reproductive success, it is a footnote written in chromosomes that proves how completely state policy colonized intimacy. Where chronicles are silent, DNA records continuity. Where chronicles exaggerate numbers, DNA confirms scale. Both together reveal the same grammar. The empire multiplied itself through households. Yet alongside this systemic endurance is another legacy, resistance remembered in myth. The story of the princess who struck the conqueror persists not because it was factual, but because it was needed. Cultures preserve tales of defiance to fill silences left by ledgers. The absence of women's own words is answered by the invention of voices that act when history did not record action. This too is survival, even if only in narrative. So what survives when the empire falls? The ledgers survive, copied into successor states. The practices survive, naturalized into local politics. The myths survive, humming under the melody of chronicles. The categories survive, households as governments, daughters as treaties, widows as levers. The empire dissolved, but the habits it normalized continued to shape states that replaced it. The hook that must close the circle is this. When a government teaches itself to count intimacy as carefully as coin, the tally does not stop when banners fall. It becomes a way of thinking that outlives the men who enforced it. The Mongol Empire is gone, but the logic it perfected, that private life can be public policy, that households can be empires in miniature, that obedience can be audited in beds as well as in battlefields, remains legible centuries later. The machine did not die with its maker. It went to seed, and the world still harvests from it. This is where the script ends, back in the courtyard where it began. The smoke clears. The line moves. Someone still writes the list. And the only question left is the one that began the story. When bodies are entered into a ledger, who holds the pen?